Hello, I'm Brigantia, Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Sunday. We are going to be continuing our Loki series. Last week we investigated some of the baggage surrounding him and things that have been stumbling blocks that get in the way of people really investigating this god, seeing who he is, what he is, and whether or not he is as advertised. But this week I want to deal with just the bare bones of Loki, who his family was, his general role in mythology, and things that I've done so far that have been successful in helping me get better acquainted with this particular god and coming closer to finding out why he chose to take an interest. Let's begin with the family tree, which in and of itself is controversial because I did find varying opinions. In fact, I found 4 recurring themes of different parents, different siblings, different children. There's a lot going on there. So I take everything with a grain of salt anyway, and when it comes to Loki and the information we've inherited about him, I'm taking it with a huge lump of salt. So this information that I'm conveying, it is one of the more common possibilities, but it is not the only. And if you're interested in Loki, by all means, do the follow-up research and just arrive at your own conclusions, because it's interesting. Just the meanings of the names of all these family members are interesting, as we're about to discover. Now, Loki's father, it was a giant called Prometheus, and this name means cruel striker. This is considered both a reference to lightning, over which Prometheus presumably had some control or some influence over, and the idea of him being a cruel striker is a reference to being the father of Loki, and that his act of conceiving this child with Loki's mother was just cruel in and of itself. It just feels like Loki was set up to have a smear job done on him, have a character assassination before he even gets started. So I do find these name meanings quite interesting. Now, Loki's mother is called Laufey, and this name is sometimes interpreted as full of leaves, but sometimes her name is given as Nal, which means needle. Now, being full of leaves and needles, these are not necessarily contradictory things, because the name needle itself could refer to the leaves, of course, of pine trees and other evergreen trees. They can certainly be full of leaves, but be full of needles as well. Now, Laufey may have been a goddess, she may have been a giantess. It's a little unclear. I personally think that it's more likely that she was a goddess, because I have also read that within Norse culture, that sometimes the parent of higher status, at least amongst the mythos, is the one who bestowed the surname upon the children. So, for Loki to be Loki Lafrason, that would certainly indicate to me that his mother was in fact a goddess and was considered as being of higher rank than his giant father. And this would also be sufficient of a foundation for Loki to have a godhood in and of himself. And I have noticed that there are certainly people who want to minimize the idea that Loki was a god or deny his divinity altogether. And I have to say these voices come consistently from people who are determined to hate him and have a very, very closed mind on the subject. Food for thought. People's opinions are always a little bit different once you see they've got some skin in the game. But moving on, when it comes to the status of giants, some people have expressed the view that the giants of Norse mythology were essentially the equivalent of the Titans, and then the Aesir and the Vanir were kind of the equivalent of the Olympians. And that the giants and the Titans, they were the old gods, and then they were overthrown and replaced by the new generation. Now, if we see this in this light, Loki with a giant father and a goddess mother, in a way his very being is a bridge between the old gods and the new. And I do seem to think this does make him more of a transitional figure, or at least a very luminal figure, because he is in between. He is neither one nor the other. He's not really welcomed with one or the other. He is simply himself, and he is caught right in the middle of it. Now, speaking of being in the middle of things, I do think that Loki has that in common with Hades, to certain respects. Hades was definitely an Olympian god, but he didn't live amongst them. He had his own realm to be contending with. He had his own responsibilities, and one of those responsibilities was making sure that the Titans stayed bound in Tartarus, where they could not cause uproar, chaos, and destruction. So essentially, Hades was an outsider. He was outside the normal social order. He wasn't in amongst the thick of things, and neither was Loki. Now, Loki didn't have the job of keeping the giants out from underfoot of the Aesir, but certainly he was a go-between that both sides used on a pretty regular basis. Now, it is said that Loki has two siblings, specifically brothers. The first is Blister, whose name means calming lightning, or walking among bees. You're going to have to ask someone who's more familiar with Norse linguistics to explain why we had such different possibilities. Now, with the calming lightning, that would tell me that he may have inherited his father's capacity to control lightning in some way. But being calming, of which, I've never really thought of lightning as being a calm thing, but maybe the calming said that he was a more calm and more even-tempered person by disposition than his father was. Now, as far as walking among the bees, this has led some people to believe that Blister may have been a beekeeper. But because we have our usual lack of information, we don't really know. But that seems like a pretty reasonable possibility. It's not something that I think could be just easily dismissed out of mind. Now we come to Helblindi. His name means all blind or death defier. The title Death Defier is very interesting because apparently this is a name that was also given to Odin. Now, this has led to speculation that Loki and Odin may, they are reckoned to be blood brothers by oath, but they may have also had a more literal kinship. Now, it was said that Helblindi may or may not have had the same father as Loki. This is quite unclear. But if they had the same mother but different fathers, them becoming brothers by oath, that might have been a reaffirmation of their bond. We are not just bonded by our shared blood and our mother, but we are brothers by choice as well, symbolizing a closer friendship, which, if that was indeed the case, that certainly kind of puts a different spin on the whole relationship between Odin and Loki, and why Loki might have reacted the way he did in later myths, given how things developed between himself and the Aesir, and Odin's role in it. Now, let's go on to the issue of Loki's children, of whom he had 6. We will begin with the horse incident. If you're familiar with Norse mythology, you know what I'm about to talk about. Please excuse my cough drop. Allergies are a bitch. Now, in the tale of the fortification of Asgard, the gods decided they wanted to build a wall around Asgard, but they didn't want to build it themselves for whatever reason. So they farmed out the job, and it was on the condition it had to be done within a certain period of time, and in exchange, Freya's hand in marriage would be given to the worker. This was agreed to. The time drew close, and it appeared the project would actually be completed on schedule. All of a sudden, nobody wanted to pay their bills. Huh. Funny how that works. First, you don't want to do the work, and then you don't want to pay your bills. So Loki was tasked with fixing it. Now, amongst Loki's many talents, he is a master of shape-shifting, and so he transformed into a mare, and this enabled him to distract the worker's horse, who happened to be a stallion, and without the help of the horse, the worker wasn't able to complete the wall on time, so the gods didn't have to comply with the terms, and Freya wasn't married off. So they all got what they wanted, except for the worker, who ended up doing this wonderful thing for free. Now, Loki ended up doing his job a little too well, and while he was in this mare state, he ended up getting impregnated by the stallion, and in due course gave birth to the 8-legged Sleipnir, and he ultimately gave this foal as a gift to Odin. So Loki's ability to shapeshift clearly goes well beyond the realms of just a mere disguise. If needs be, he can alter biology. Now, the ability to alter biology to such an extent, if that doesn't say that Loki possesses a godly and divine power, I'm really not sure what does. Now, Sleipnir's name means the slidey one or the slippery one, which all I can think of is that might have been a reference to his birth. And Sleipnir was capable of traveling over land, sea, and air, as well as between the realms. However, unlike some of Sleipnir's later siblings who had very animalistic traits, I'm not seeing an indication that Sleipnir had intellectual capacity beyond the realm of animals in general. So this might have been why Loki actually gave this child as a gift instead of raising this child as one normally would. You know, I just wonder. And as far as I know, that is the only time Loki ever gave birth. And a lot of people make a big to-do about this. I'm just saying, we're dealing with the gods. The same rules don't apply to him as apply to us. Pardon me, pardon me. Another thing to think of is that when Loki went into the shape of the mare, or when Loki went in disguise as a female, as he sometimes did on some of the adventures, it wasn't simply him. That I've never gotten the sense that he was expressing another aspect of himself, because I've seen some people refer to Loki as being their matron goddess, and I'm thinking, I think that is kind of a misinterpretation, and I think people fall into that because of modern ideas about gender identity and all that, and some people in the pagan community are very anxious to find a deity that relates to them on that kind of level, and so I think they are seeing something that isn't there, because any other time Loki had children, and for the vast majority of his mythology, he is firmly within the masculine realm. And I have to say, when he comes to me in meditations, I am definitely feeling a very overtly masculine energy. So the fact that he's able to go so far into the feminine, to the point where he could actually give birth in the form of that mare, that's saying more about his, the extraordinary capacity of his magic, his ability to shapeshift, and his ability to reshape things as the situation requires. Loki was a great one for thinking outside the box and doing what was necessary to do. He had a job to do, and in the course of doing that job, he ended up with a baby, so I think this says more about Loki's determination to get something done than it does about him being an androgynous character or a transgender character or anything like this. That's my view. Other people have theirs. By all means, everything to do with Loki is very contradictory. I think to a certain extent we're all seeing kind of what we want to see. So do your own investigations and reach your own conclusions. Now, let's go on. Now to Angrboda, a giantess. Was she a wife or was she his mistress? Accounts vary. We're not really sure if his relationship with Angrboda was a formal and legal union or not. But what is beyond dispute is that they did produce 3 children together, including Loki's only daughter. So first we have Hel, who was a goddess of the underworld, who also had her name, Helheim. And she's said to have a body that is half living, half corpse. Usually I see is her split kind of down on the middle. One side is living and the other side is skeletal and decaying and all that. Others have her top half appearing to be living, but then her bottom half is decaying. So it is interesting, and there is some discussion about whether this is merely the appearance that she gave to the rest of the world, or if this was actually how she looked. And I think why this is called into question is because she is the daughter of a renowned shapeshifter. So the appearance that Loki's children have, you have to keep in mind who their father is. Now we have Jormungandr. I'm doing my best with these names. If you can know better in the comments, please correct me. I would appreciate it. But Jormungandr was essentially a giant serpent, and he grew and grew and grew until he was large enough to encircle the entire world. The Aesir said, let's put him on Midgard, which is their word for Earth. And so it's said that Jormungandr is currently around the Earth, and during Ragnarok, he's supposedly destined to kill Thor. Now we have Fenrir, who was in wolf form, and he bit off the hand of the god Tyr when the gods decided to bind Fenrir. Now they didn't bind Fenrir immediately. All of this happened, banishing Hel off to the underworld, banishing Jormungandr to Midgard, binding Fenrir. This all happened after the gods encountered a prophecy, saying that, oh, Loki's children, they're going to have all this involvement in Ragnarok, they're going to cause your doom and everything else. And so the gods took action, and I do see this as sowing the seeds of your own destruction. I see this as a self-fulfilling prophecy. That instead of saying, oh, well, maybe we need to develop relationships with these people, maybe that fate isn't completely set in stone, but instead they take action that almost guarantee that all of these various people are going to see them in the light of enemies. Now, it is said that Fenrir's name means Fen Dweller, and part of his prophecy is that he would be killing Odin during Ragnarok. So you can see why Odin would be a little bit twitchy. Not a comfortable idea, thinking that your nephew might do away with you. But there it is. So we have Sweet Sleipnir, who was a gift to Odin, and then we come down to the years with Angrboda, and we have 3 children, 2 of whom are said to have an overt role in Ragnarok. Hell, I think it's a little less sure what she'll be doing exactly. And then we come down to Sigyn. Her name means victorious woman, and she is Loki's acknowledged wife. They had 2 sons together, Vali and Narfi, or sometimes called Nari, and that name might mean corpse. And we only see them referenced after the death of Balder, and specifically in reference to Loki's punishment for his role in that death, which we'll be dealing with that whole mess in another video. Vali is then transformed by Odin into a wolf, and Vali is, overcome with this animalistic rage, and he devours his brother Narfi in full view of his parents. And Narfi's entrails are used to bind Loki to a rock in a cave. And then suspended above Loki is a serpent, brought courtesy of the goddess Skadi, also a giantess, by the way. And this serpent drips venom onto Loki, and this causes Loki such extreme pain that it's said that it causes earthquakes on Midgard. Sigyn has been there the whole time, holding a bowl to catch the venom, sparing Loki as much as she can, leaving aside only when she has to empty the bowl. Now, it was pointed out by some of the people who also pointed out other parallels between the Norse and Greek myths, that Loki's punishment has certain similarities to the punishment of Prometheus in the Greek myth. Prometheus, if you'll recall, took fire from Mount Olympus to give to mankind. And for his trouble, he was tied to a rock, being pecked at by vultures, internal organs, all kinds of damage, and then his wounds would heal just enough so he wouldn't die, and so he is punished for all of eternity. Now with Loki, it's said that as we draw close to Ragnarok, he'll slip from his bonds, and then he'll join the giants, and, stuff will happen. Well, we'll see. But it does seem, just look at all that we have to unpack here. It does seem like we are seeing a certain progression of time in which Loki was in an okay position with the gods, where things got complicated, and some of that complications was coming from the gods' reactions to his children. It's, by all accounts, Loki in particular is said to have had great love for Fenrir. So imagine seeing your child, bound for all of eternity for something he hasn't even done yet. That's going to prey on your mind. And then when it comes to Loki's relationship with Sigyn, there must have been something there. I find it very odd that if she had been with him out of any sense of duty, or if their relationship was in this bad condition, or she didn't trust him and what he was up to ultimately, that she would have gone to the effort, hauled the bowl, tried to save him as much as she can, did everything after watching the destruction of her children, because from what I understand of the myths is that Vali was never transformed out of that wolf state. He was still in there, still maddened, and every time she would see Loki, she would see him tied down by the entrails of her other son. I'm just saying that I think it would be too much for the fortitude of even a goddess to go through all that for someone who she did not have actual love for. Now, even if it was a scenario in which she was left there perhaps left behind out of as part of punishment, because apparently Odin wasn't concerned with just punishing the guilty in this case. That still wouldn't explain why she would, be protecting Loki, or why she would do other things for him. So it raises a lot of questions in my mind. It just does. Now, a little bit more about Loki himself. This complicated god. Even the meaning of his name is debated. One of the theories associates the name Loki with the word Logi. Logi means fire, and through some etymological reasons, some people believe that Loki was a god of fire, or at least had the power of fire at his disposal. This is debated. Some people consider it completely debunked. I don't know enough about the linguistics, and I'm certainly not an expert on Old Norse, and as far as I can tell, neither were some of the people talking about it. So I'm not quite sure what to believe. But it is one possibility. Another possibility, and this is accepted as being more likely, is that the meaning of the word name Loki has to do with knots, loops, or even a spider's web. In fact, one of the signs that Loki may be coming into your life is encountering an unusual number of spiders, and I can confirm this. The amount of spiders that invaded my home come September was well beyond the seasonal norm. I'll just put it that way. But one reason why people like this idea is because they do see Loki in this troublemaker light, as someone who's not even making trouble for a purpose, but making trouble just to make trouble, and having loops and knots and confusions and webs and tangles, and I think that's another reason why this possibility is more widely embraced, because it reinforces some people's natural prejudices. Now, the third possibility comes from an alternate form of Loki's name, which is acknowledged, called Loptir. That's believed to come from the Old Norse word for air, which is lopt. And that would associate Loki with the element of air. Now, he is sometimes referred to as being silver-tongued, and he's also associated with the planet Mercury. And so speech, traveling hither and thither, it's all tied up with the element of air. So I think at the very least, if Loki had any kind of elemental association, I think there is a good case for air. Now, Loki as Trickster. If we're just looking at the myths at face value, and honestly I think some people never go beneath the surface, you see Loki and he just seems to be the troublemaker and the source of both mischief and mayhem. But looked at a little dispassionately, I think some people, they read the myths and they start rooting for certain deities as if they were rooting for their favorite sports team. But setting aside the team jerseys for the moment, if you just look at what's going on and why, Loki is the one who is making things happen. Now, it's true that nobody likes a pot stirrer, but if no one stirs the pot, then the soup will burn. Loki is that balancing energy that is preventing Odin's sense of order from becoming too rigid and becoming too stagnant. And you have to admit that when you look at the gods themselves, there is a general sense of entropy. They found their groove, and they're going to stay in that groove, and they're just looping around and around, and they're not really evolving until they have to deal with Loki. And when Loki isn't doing something that the rest of the gods couldn't be bothered to do themselves, he is putting the gods into positions where they have to take action, forcing them to grow and change, even if he's the source of their wrath, even if he's at the source of their mockery. And that's something else, is that when it comes to the general denigration of Loki, it comes from certain quarters. I'm trying to think of how to put this tactfully. I think some of that comes from, because Loki was outside the box, and because he was very practical, he was someone who would get the job done, and if that meant using different means, or if it meant making someone uncomfortable, well, that was just price of doing business. You cannot make an omelet without breaking some eggs. And I think they mistake Loki's independence of pride. You know, he is not such a proud deity that he can't bring himself to get his hands dirty or to do things that are uncomfortable. And I think that's what's puts some people off. He's lacking the dignity of Odin. He's lacking the serious majesty of Thor. He's lacking the fairness of Tyr. Maybe so. But Loki gets shit done. And some of the rest of them would know what shit needed to get attended to if he wasn't the one who was ultimately putting them into positions where the matter was brought to their attention. This strikes me as the kind of behavior that is engaged in when someone is not listened to. And I can relate to this a lot. I have not gone through most of my life with the expectation that people are going to listen to me or take anything that I say seriously. But if I can get people there through the back door, if I can get them to thinking about one thing that eventually leads them to connect the dot to the actual issue at hand, then I'll do that. If there's something that I think needs to be done, even if I think I'm not the best person to do it, even if I think I'm not doing it particularly well, I think at the end of the day it's better for it to get accomplished than it is for it to be left undone. And I also share a kind of frustration with people who are so comfortable with their status quo that they cannot see past the end of their own noses, and they can't even look forward to see what the consequences of their stagnation is. So at the very least, I think I have a few things in common with Loki. Now when it comes to growth and change, this often comes in the force of chaos. And chaos is absolutely inevitable. People like to pretend it isn't, but reality does not unfold in a manner that accommodates our wishes and dreams. Now if you look at ancient myths just around the globe, oftentimes chaos is a beginning point, and then order is forged in reaction to that state of chaos. The order lasts for a time, then it deteriorates, and it's broken apart by more chaos. And so the cycle goes on. Chaos is that life force. The order is what gives that life force shape and form and is able to continue on in that form for a period of time. But without the chaos, there can be no life. So I think that in the coming years, within the pagan community, we would be well served to take another look at how we really view the idea of chaos and whether or not our personal convictions are really in alignment with reality and in alignment with what the function of chaos is. This brings us to the idea of Loki being a liminal deity. Now, liminal deity is a god or a goddess who presides over in-between spaces, thresholds, gates, doorways, crossroads, even the gateway between life and death. They are the crossers of boundaries. Oftentimes, deities that go through obvious mythological cycles of death and rebirth, they are considered liminal deities, because you think about the boundary between life and death. That's fundamental to our existence, and the in-between is a powerful spot. Certainly Loki's time being bound in the cave and tortured, that is a state that's not only death-like, but it bears a striking resemblance to the Abrahamic concept of hell. I'm just tossing that out there. Loki's eventual escape from that place is a kind of rising again, only with a hefty helping of vengeance to go with it, which you can't say that this all came out of nowhere. Just tossing that out. But also think about it in a more fundamental way. Through his parentage, the son of a giant and a goddess, his very existence is an in-between space. And so Loki's role in Norse mythology and the nature of his acts and why it's worth looking at the effects of actions taken within mythology as well as just the actions in and of themselves. It is all in between. It is all about how do we get from point A to point B, because being a creature of the in-between, you know that things cannot stay stagnant forever. Things must flow. And it's true, Loki made many a mess, But he also did more than his part in cleaning up plenty of messes as well. And I think perhaps his role in Ragnarok is somewhat misunderstood. Because ultimately, I have said in other videos, I do think the gods all go through their own reincarnative process or renewal process. So I do think that at the end of Ragnarok, there is another sense of renewal. But I think essentially what Loki is destroying is not so much the gods themselves or the good things about the order they created, but their stagnation and their inability to evolve past a certain point. I think that's what's being destroyed. And instead of them wasting away, like a cancer eating them from the inside out, I think he's just making a clean break of it. So there's more than one way to look at all of this. Now, even Loki's children, as different as they all were from one another, these were all children of the in-between. These were also children who were different because they were born different or because they were forced to become different. They were outcasts of a sort. Even his children with Sigyn, they, for all account, they seemed to be normal at the time, but then, one got changed into a wolf and ate his poor brother, and the poor brother got eaten, and it's just unfair things happened to them. They were put in positions that force them into this no man's land space of the in-between. This is one reason why it's believed that Loki absolutely presides over people who are outcasts in general, who don't fit in, who are different, who are misunderstood. And also because of his association with the states of in-between, which is also the space where magic comes from and where we tap into. And because Loki's so strongly associated with his magical capabilities, it's no wonder that from time to time, there'll be practitioners like me who find themselves comfortable with his energy and understand his role and understand his purpose. And who also, by nature of being practitioners of the craft, are kind of on the outside looking in just generally. Something to think about. I think Loki has much to teach, and some of us have much to learn about it. Now, as far as getting to know Loki goes, mythology and listening to other people's opinions will only take us so far. Conventional ideas about Loki paint a very particular picture. It's very specific. But over the course of the last few months, something's not sitting right with me. It's just an intuition, but I think there's something that's just not adding up. And this has led me to have a more open mind as follows, as maybe there's another interpretation. Maybe what we were presented isn't quite right. Things I think about. What has been more helpful in getting to know him has been in the form of meditation and dream work. This has been most successful for me, and honestly it's been the primary means for Loki to communicate with me, providing guidance, and also giving me hints about why he came around to begin with. Prayers and offerings are also welcome. I can confirm that he has an undeniable sweet tooth. I've noticed he particularly enjoys chocolate and baked goods that involve cinnamon. He does like his whiskey as well, and he also likes offerings of dragon's blood incense. He does enjoy music, and his enjoyment of music isn't restricted to traditional styles. This may sound weird, but the song Radioactive by Imagine Dragons, for whatever reason, I just get a sense that Loki is smiling whenever I play it. Maybe it's the lyrics. If you look at them, there's a certain Lokian kind of spirit to them. Oh, so that's where we are this week. A little bit of general info, a little bit more of the controversy surrounding him, and a little bit of just a mustard seed grain of doubt. It says maybe there's more here than meets the eye. So, my voice is about to go on me, so I've got to finish this video. Thank you for bearing with me and for putting up with my videos I've been making as I've struggled on with the allergies. It's very much appreciated. I will see you next time. Bye.